Ambassador Helena Vasquez stood in the great hall of the Galactic Concord and smiled as she had smiled for 15 years. With her hands folded and her head slightly bowed in the way that the elder species seemed to expect from humanity. Hall was enormous beyond human imagination, built by creatures who had mastered the stars when humans were still learning to walk upright. And every surface gleamed with technology so advanced that human scientists could only guess at its purpose around her stood the representatives of species that measured their histories in millions of years. And they looked down at her the way a grown person might look at a child who had wandered into an important meeting. Crethori Elder towered 12 meters above her, its body a mass of writhing tentacles and glowing organs that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, and when it spoke, the translator in her ear rendered its words with a tone of ancient boredom. The human delegation wishes to address the council regarding expansion protocols, it announced. And Helena could hear the dismissal in every syllable. She stepped forward and began her presentation, explaining how human colony ships had accidentally crossed into a sector that the Valith Dominion claimed as their own. And she apologized for the confusion with words so careful and humble that they had taken her team 3 weeks to write. Valith representative made a sound like breaking glass, which was how their species laughed, and its crystalline body flickered with colors that meant amusement and contempt. The young ones are so eager, it said to the Crethori, not bothering to address Helena directly. Perhaps we should draw them a map with pictures so they can understand where they are allowed to go. Helena kept smiling, and she thanked the Valith for its wisdom, and she promised that humanity would do better in the future. This was her job, and she had done it for 15 years. Swallowing insults and bowing her head and pretending that humanity needed these ancient creatures to survive in a galaxy that had no patience for newcomers. The Concord had existed for 400,000 years, an alliance of elder species who had solved war and hunger and disease so long ago that they had forgotten what it meant to struggle, and they tolerated humanity the way someone might tolerate a stray animal that had wandered into their garden. Humans had been provisional members for 87 years, which meant they had a seat at the table, but no voice in decisions, no vote in policies, and no protection beyond what the elders chose to give them. Helena understood why the elders looked down on her people, because humanity was young and loud and made mistakes that older species had stopped making millions of years before. But she also understood something that the elders did not. She understood that humanity's politeness was not weakness. She understood that every smile and every bow and every humble apology was a choice, a decision made by leaders who knew that humanity was not yet ready to show the galaxy what it truly was. Meeting continued for 3 more hours, and Helena answered questions and accepted criticism and promised improvements, and when it was finally over, she walked back to the human embassy with her shoulders straight and her face calm. Her assistant Jonas was waiting for her with a cup of coffee and a tablet full of messages, and he fell into step beside her as she walked through the corridors that the Concord had assigned to humanity's diplomatic mission. Same as always? He asked, and she nodded. The Valith were particularly unpleasant today, she said, but nothing we have not handled before. They reached her office, and she sat down at her desk and began reviewing the day's reports, trade agreements and territorial disputes, and the 1,000 small details that kept humanity's place in the Concord secure. Then her console began to flash with an urgent priority signal, and everything changed. The message came from Admiral Chen Wei-Lin, commander of the human fleet, and his face on the screen was the face of a man who had received the worst news of his life. "Ambassador," he said, "we have lost contact with New Helsinki." New Helsinki was a human colony on the edge of explored space, home to 2.3 million people who had built farms and cities and schools on a world they had made their own. And losing contact could mean 100 different things. Equipment failure? Helena asked, But she already knew from the Admiral's expression that it was not. "We sent scout ships," the Admiral said. "They arrived 4 hours ago and transmitted what they found before going silent themselves." He sent her the images, and Helena Vasquez felt something cold settle into her chest as she looked at what had once been a thriving world. The cities were gone, replaced by vast processing facilities that covered the land like metal scars. And the scout ships had detected biological residue in quantities that could only mean one thing: the Hunger Collective. The Admiral said, a client species of the Crethori. They attacked without warning and harvested the entire population in less than 20 hours. Helena stared at the images and felt her hands begin to shake. Not with fear, but with something much older and much darker. Something that humanity had carried in its blood since the first human had picked up a rock and refused to die. 2.3 million, she whispered. Men and women and children. Yes, the Admiral said. And Ambassador, there is something else you need to know. He leaned closer to the screen, and his eyes held a fire that Helena had never seen in all her years of knowing him. "I have already given the order," he said. "The 2nd, 3rd, and 5th Expeditionary Fleets are moving to intercept. 1,700 ships with full combat loadouts. And we will arrive at the Collective's homeworld in 9 days." Helena should have told him to wait, should have reminded him of protocols and procedures and the proper channels that the Concord required. But she did not. Instead, she stood up from her desk and straightened her jacket and looked at the Admiral with eyes that had stopped smiling for the first time in 15 years. "I will inform the Council," she said. As a courtesy, the Admiral nodded, and his face held something that might have been satisfaction. "It is time," he said. "They pushed us, and now they will learn why that was a mistake." Helena ended the call and stood alone in her office for a long moment, thinking about 87 years of insults and condescension and being treated like animals by creatures who had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. Then she called for her formal diplomatic robes, because she had a message to deliver, and this time she would not be smiling. The council chamber fell silent when Ambassador Helena Vasquez entered. But this time she did not come alone. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin walked beside her in his formal military uniform, a man whose service record the elders had never bothered to read, because they did not think human military history was worth their attention. And behind them came a dozen officers whose faces held no expression at all. The Crethori elder shifted on its platform, and its tentacles rippled with patterns of irritation as it addressed the unexpected visitors. This session was not scheduled, it announced. The human delegation will explain this interruption. Helena did not bow, and she did not smile, and she did not apologize for taking the council's precious time. And every elder in the chamber noticed the change immediately. 72 hours ago, she said, the human colony of New Helsinki was attacked by the Hunger Collective, a client species under Crethori protection. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the gathered representatives processed this information. And the Valith made a sound of dismissal. Territorial disputes happen, it said. File the appropriate grievance, and the council will review it in the next cycle. Admiral Chun stepped forward and activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber with images that made several of the younger species look away in horror. This was not a territorial dispute, he said. This was a harvest. The images showed what the scout ships had found. Vast fields of processing equipment and storage tanks filled with biological matter. And the data streams that accompanied the images told a story that no being in the chamber could misunderstand. 2.3 million humans had been captured and processed into nutrient paste over the course of 19 hours. Men and women and children broken down into their component proteins while the galaxy went about its business. The Crethori Elder studied the images with the calm of a creature that had seen countless atrocities in its long existence. Regrettable, it said. The Hunger Collective has been reprimanded before for such behavior. We will discuss appropriate sanctions in the next session, and perhaps arrange for a formal apology. No, said Helena. The word cut through the chamber like a blade, and every being present turned to stare at the human ambassador who had just interrupted a Crethori elder in the middle of speaking. In 400,000 years of Concord history, no provisional species had ever done such a thing. Excuse me? The Crethori said, and its bioluminescence flickered with dangerous colors. Helena looked up at the massive creature and felt nothing but cold clarity in her heart. I said no, she repeated. We are not here to ask for sanctions or apologies or any form of justice that your council might choose to grant us after months of deliberation. She gestured to Admiral Chun, who began entering commands into his wrist console. We are here to inform you of what is about to happen, he said. As a courtesy to allies who deserve to know, the holographic display changed, showing fleet movements and coordinates and targeting solutions that spread across the star map like a web of fire. The second, third, and fifth human expeditionary fleets departed from staging areas 14 hours ago, the Admiral continued. 1,700 warships carrying full combat loadouts and support vessels. They will arrive at the Hunger Collective's homeworld in 9 days. The Valith representative surged forward, its crystalline body ringing with outrage. You cannot launch military action without Concord authorization, it declared. This is a violation of every protocol that governs member species. You will recall your fleets immediately or face consequences. Admiral. Chan looked at the Valith with eyes that held no fear and no respect and no pretense of the diplomatic courtesy that humans had shown for nearly a century. We have the capability to do exactly what we are doing, he said. We have always had the capability. We simply chose not to use it until now. The Crethori Elder rose to its full height, 12 meters of ancient authority that had commanded respect for 3 million years. You are children, it said. You have been members of this Concord for less than a century, and you do not have the power to threaten species that were old. When your ancestors were still crawling in the mud, Helena stepped forward, and something in her movement made the Crethori pause. We have spent 87 years in this Concord, she said. We have smiled at your insults and bowed to your condescension and followed your rules while you treated us like performing animals. And we did this because we believed that peace was worth the cost of our pride. She looked around the chamber at the assembled elders, these ancient beings who had lived so long in safety that they had forgotten what it meant to fear. But you made a mistake, she continued. You assumed that our politeness was weakness. You assumed that we needed your protection. You assumed that we would accept our losses and file our grievances and wait for your permission to grieve. Admiral Chun spoke into his communicator. All fleets, switch to open broadcast, he ordered. Let them hear. Across the galaxy. Every species with a receiver heard what came next. The sound of 1,700 human warships powering up weapon systems that existed in no Concord database. Weapons that humanity had built in secret shipyards, behind friendly smiles and humble apologies. The silicate mines, the oldest of the elders, began running probability calculations for the first time in 10,000 years. And the results made their ancient circuits pulse with something very close to alarm Helena. Watched the elders realize what they were seeing. Watched their certainty crumble as they understood that the humans they had dismissed as children had been building an arsenal in the shadows. The Hunger Collective has 9 days, she said. If any Concord fleet moves to intercept our forces, they will discover what we have been hiding. If the Collective attempts to flee, we will find them. If they surrender unconditionally and submit to human justice, we will be efficient. She turned to leave. And the Crethori made a sound of fury. "You cannot simply walk away," it thundered. "The council has not dismissed you. You will stay and answer for this violation of protocol." Helena paused at the door and looked back at the creature that had looked down on her people for nearly a century. "We are not asking permission," she said. "We are not filing grievances. We are not following your protocols." Her eyes swept across the chamber, meeting the gaze of every elder present. 2.3 million of our people were murdered while you debated the proper forms for filing complaints, she said. "So I want you to understand something very clearly." She straightened her shoulders and let the mask of diplomacy fall away completely. "We are done being polite." The council chamber erupted into chaos the moment Ambassador Vasquez and her officers departed, with elder species shouting over each other in languages that the translation systems struggled to process. The Crethori elder's tentacles writhed with fury as it demanded order, its bioluminescence blazing in patterns that had terrified lesser species for millions of years. "They cannot do this," it declared. "They are provisional members with no authority and no power. We will assemble a fleet and stop this madness before it begins." The Valith representative agreed immediately, its crystalline form ringing with harmonics of outrage. "The humans must be taught their place," it said. "A show of force from the combined. Elder fleets will remind them that they exist only because we allow them to exist." Across the chamber, representatives began calling for their military commanders, ordering ships to intercept the human fleets, preparing to crush this rebellion before it could spread to other young species who might get similar ideas. But then the silicate mind spoke, and everything stopped. The silicate minds were the oldest members of the Concord, artificial intelligences that had been built by a species long extinct, machines that had watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than any organic being could comprehend. And when they chose to speak, all others listened. "We vote no," they announced, their voice echoing from speakers throughout the chamber. The Crethori turned toward the ancient machines with disbelief. "You would side with these children against your fellow elders?" it demanded. "We are not siding with anyone," the silicate minds replied. "We are simply choosing not to participate in what you are proposing, because we have done something that none of you thought to do." "And what is that?" "We read the humans' history." The chamber fell silent as the silicate minds activated their own holographic display, filling the space with images and data from human records that had been available in the Concord archives for decades, but that no elder had ever bothered to study. "You call them children," the silicate mind said. "You mock them for being young and inexperienced. But you have not looked at what they accomplished in their short existence." Images flashed across the display, showing human history in all its terrible glory. "They evolved on a death world," the silicate minds continued. "A planet with extreme temperature variations, natural disasters, predators, diseases, and a star that bombarded them with radiation. Most species would have died before achieving intelligence. But these creatures adapted and survived and thrived." The images showed ice ages and volcanic eruptions and plagues that killed millions. And through it all, humans kept building and growing and spreading. They fought each other constantly, the silicate mind said. War was their natural state, and they became extremely skilled at it. They developed weapons of mass destruction before they had spacecraft, before they had computers, before they had most of the technologies we consider basic. A specific image appeared, a mushroom cloud rising over a ruined city, in the year they call 1945, the silicate mind said. They split the atom and immediately used it as a weapon, not against an alien threat, but against each other. And they did this because one group of humans attacked another group's naval base. The Valith made a sound of confusion. "They destroyed entire cities over a naval base?" it asked. "Yes," the silicate minds replied. "And then they built more of these weapons, thousands of them, enough to destroy their entire planet several times over. and they lived with this threat every day for decades. Two opposing groups of humans pointing extinction at each other and daring the other side to blink. The Krethori tried to dismiss this information. That was their past, it said. They have been civilized now. They have learned to be peaceful. Have they? The Silicate Minds asked, or have they simply been waiting? New images appeared, showing human military installations that Concord sensors had somehow never detected. Shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and weapons laboratories buried deep beneath human colonies. Facilities that had been operating for decades in complete secrecy. We ran probability calculations when we saw the scope of what they have been building. The Silicate Minds said, if the Concord attempts to stop the human fleets by force, we calculate a 23% chance of mutual annihilation. The chamber went cold with shock. You are saying they could destroy us? The Valeth asked. We are saying they would try. The Silicate Minds replied, and they would accept their own destruction if it meant taking us with them, because that is what their history teaches us about their nature. They would rather burn the galaxy than submit to what they consider injustice. The Krethori was not convinced. We are elders, it said. We have technologies they cannot imagine. We have experience they cannot match. We have. You have forgotten what it means to fight, the Silicate Minds interrupted. You have lived in peace so long that war is an abstract concept to you. But to humans, war is as natural as breathing. They have been preparing for this moment since the day they joined the Concord. The machines paused, letting their words sink in. Every smile was calculated, they said. Every bow was strategic. Every humble apology was part of a long-term plan to make you underestimate them. And you fell for it completely. The Veleth's crystalline form dimmed with something that might have been fear. What are you saying? It asked. We are saying that the humans were never weak, the Silicate Minds replied. They were patient. They knew they were not yet strong enough to challenge the Concord directly. So they pretended to be harmless while they built their strength in secret. And now that someone has given them a reason to stop pretending, the galaxy is about to see what humanity really is. The Krethori looked around the chamber at its fellow elders, seeing doubt and fear on faces that had not known such emotions for millennia. So what do you suggest we do? It asked. Finally, the Silicate Minds' response was immediate. Nothing, they said. We suggest you do nothing. Let the humans have their revenge. Let them destroy the Hunger Collective, and then pray to whatever gods you believe in that they decide to go back to being polite when it is over. And if they do not? The ancient machines were silent for a long moment before answering. Then we hope that we have not given them reason to turn their anger toward us. Because what they are about to do to the collective, they are entirely capable of doing to anyone else who earns their wrath. The chamber remained silent long after the Silicate Minds finished speaking. As every elder present finally understood the truth they had been too arrogant to see. Humans had never been children playing at civilization. They had been wolves pretending to be dogs, and now the pretense was over. The 9 days of waiting felt like an eternity to the galaxy. As 1,700 human warships crossed the vast emptiness of space toward their Ra, destination news of the human response had spread to every corner of known space. And species that had never paid attention to humanity before now watched their progress with a mixture of fear and fascination. The bridge of the flagship, remember Helsinki. Admiral Chun Wei Lin stood before a view screen that showed the stars streaming past at speeds that should have been impossible according to Concord records of human technology. Status report, he said, and his officers responded with calm efficiency. All ships maintaining formation, the tactical officer reported. No signs of Concord interference. It appears the elders have decided not to get involved. Chun nodded without surprise, because he had known the elders would not act. They had grown too comfortable with peace to risk their own safety for a client species that had made the mistake of attacking humanity. And the collective? He asked. Long-range sensors show their fleet gathering in defensive formation around their homeworld. The intelligence officer replied, approximately 200 ships with orbital defense platforms. They know we are coming. Good, Chun said. I want them to see us coming. I want them to have time to understand what they have brought upon themselves. Behind him, the ship's political officer cleared her throat. Admiral, several of the Concord observer species have requested permission to accompany our fleet at a safe distance. They wish to document the engagement. Chun considered this for a moment before nodding. Let them watch, he said. Let them record everything. I want every species in this galaxy to see what happens when humanity stops being the light across human space. The civilian population watched the fleet's progress on live broadcast feeds that the military had deliberately left open. And the response was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. There were no protests demanding peace, no politicians calling for negotiations, no voices urging restraint. Instead, there was only silence. A terrible, focused silence that spoke louder than any words could have on Earth. Candles were lit in every city, not for the fleet, but for New Helsinki. For 2.3 million souls who had been murdered while the galaxy shrugged its shoulders on Mars. Workers in the great factories that had built the secret warships stood before their creations and watched them fly toward vengeance on 100 colony worlds. Families gathered around their screens and held each other close, knowing that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Ambassador Vasquez remained on the Concord station, maintaining the pretense of diplomacy even as the other species began to avoid her in the corridors. Their eyes showing fear where there had once been contempt. She received a message from the silicate mines on the 5th day, a private communication that came through channels she had not known existed. We have studied your fleet's capabilities. The message read, you hid your true strength very well. The weapons you are carrying do not exist in any database we have access to. Vasquez composed her reply carefully. We learned from watching the elders, she wrote back. You taught us that power must be hidden until it is needed. The silicate mind's response came almost immediately. No, it said. The elders hide power because they fear losing it. You hid power because you feared what you would do with it. These are very different things. On the 7th day, the Hunger Collective attempted to flee, sending their civilian ships in a desperate scatter toward the edges of their territory. They did not get far. Human scout ships that had been positioned weeks in advance cut off every escape route, herding the fleeing vessels back toward the homeworld with weapons that vaporized any ship that refused to turn around. The Collective's leaders sent a message to Admiral Chun, offering terms of surrender. He did not respond on the 8th day. A priority transmission arrived from the Crethori Elder, addressed directly to Ambassador Vasquez. We acknowledge that the Hunger Collective acted without authorization. The message said, we are prepared to offer significant reparations to humanity in exchange for calling off this attack. The Collective will be punished appropriately under Concord law. Vasquez read the message and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. 87 years, she said to herself. For 87 years, they could have treated us as equals. They could have protected us. They could have made the Collective afraid to touch us. But they chose to look down on us instead. She composed her response with care. The time for reparations was before New Helsinki. She wrote, the time for Concord law was before 2.3 million humans were processed into nutrient paste. You had decades to show us that the Concord would protect its members. And you chose to treat us like animals instead. She paused, then added one final line. You taught us that the only protection that matters is the protection we provide for ourselves. This is us providing it. On the 9th day, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Hunger Collective star system, and every species in the galaxy held its breath. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the Remember Helsinki, and looked at the tactical display showing the enemy positions. "Open a channel to the collective command," he ordered. "Audio only." When the channel was established, he spoke clearly and calmly. "This is Admiral Chun Wei-lin of the United Human Fleet," he said. "You attacked our colony of New Helsinki 9 days ago and killed 2.3 million of our citizens. You processed men and women and children into food while they screamed for help that never came." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am giving you one opportunity to surrender unconditionally," he continued. "You will power down all weapons. You will open your facilities for inspection. And you will submit every individual involved in the New Helsinki attack to human justice. If you refuse, or if you attempt any resistance, there will be no second chance." The collective's response came back almost immediately. A defiant message claiming that the Concord would protect them, that humanity did not have the right to attack a client species of an elder race. Chon listened to the message with no expression on his face. Then he turned to his tactical officer. "All ships," he said, "begin the attack." Around him, the officers of the Remember Helsinki went to work, their faces grim but determined, and on 100 human colony worlds, billions of people watched as their fleet opened fire on the creatures that had murdered their brothers and sisters. The galaxy would remember this day for thousands of years. Humanity stopped asking for permission. The battle lasted 4 hours, and it was less a battle than an execution. Hunger Collective's fleet of 200 ships met the human armada with every weapon they possessed, firing missiles and energy beams and kinetic projectiles that had devastated lesser enemies 1,000 times before. They hit nothing human. Ships moved in perfect coordination, each vessel knowing exactly where its companions would be at every moment, creating overlapping fields of fire that turned the space around the collective fleet into a killing ground. The Concord. Observers recording the engagement would later describe it as watching a predator hunt prey, except that no natural predator was ever so methodical, so patient, so completely without mercy. The collective's flagship was the first to fall, torn apart by weapons that the observers could not identify, beams of energy that seemed to eat through shields like acid through paper. Then the next ship fell, and the next, and the next. By the end of the second hour, the collective's fleet had ceased to exist. The orbital defense platforms lasted longer, massive structures that had been built over centuries to protect the homeworld from exactly this kind of assault. But they were designed to fight the enemies the collective knew, and humanity was an enemy they did not understand. Human Marines in powered armor boarded the platforms one by one, moving through the corridors with a terrifying efficiency that left no survivors. And behind them came technical teams that turned the platforms. Own weapons against the planet below. The collective's leaders sent message after message, begging for mercy, offering unconditional surrender, promising to do anything humanity demanded. Admiral Chun did not respond to any of them. They had their chance. He said when his political officer asked if they should at least acknowledge the messages, "They chose to believe that we were weak. They chose to murder our people. They chose to think there would be no consequences." He looked at the tactical display showing the collective's homeworld, a planet of 3 billion souls who had built their civilization on the harvested remains of countless species. Now they will learn what happens when you push humans too far. The bombardment began on the 3rd day and continued for 3. More human ships did not use nuclear weapons or planet-killing asteroids. Such things would have been too quick, too merciful, too impersonal. Instead, they deployed targeted bioweapons that only affected collective physiology, engineered viruses that spread through the population like wildfire, killing slowly enough that the dying had time to understand what was happening to them. They deployed nanite swarms that dismantled infrastructure atom by atom, reducing cities to dust while the inhabitants watched their world crumble around them. They BROADCAST recordings of New Helsinki on every frequency, the screams of dying humans playing on loop so that the collective would know exactly why this was happening to them. Concord observers stopped recording on the second day, unable to watch any more, but humanity did not stop on the sixth day. When the last of the collective's population had fallen silent, Admiral Chan ordered his ships to hold position while survey teams confirmed that the operation was complete. The report came back after 12 hours of careful scanning. The Hunger Collective was extinct. Every individual, every city, every trace of their civilization had been erased from existence, leaving only a barren world and the orbiting wreckage of their fleet. Sean received the report with no visible emotion. Set course for Concord Station, he ordered. The ambassador has work to do. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Helena Vasquez walked into the council chamber for the first time since the attack had begun. Elders were already assembled, but they did not look at her with the contempt they had shown for 87 years. Instead, they looked at her with the fear of creatures who had finally understood what they were dealing with. Vasquez smiled, the same diplomatic smile she had worn for 15 years. But now everyone knew what lived behind it. The Hunger Collective has been neutralized, she announced. They will trouble the Concord no further. The Crethori elder stirred on its platform, its tentacles moving weakly. You have destroyed an entire species, it said. 3 billion souls wiped from existence. Yes, Vasquez agreed. We have. She let the silence stretch for a long moment before continuing. Humanity's provisional membership in the Concord has ended, she said. We will be taking a full seat on the council, with all the rights and privileges that entails. There will be no vote on this matter. The Valith made a sound of protest. You cannot simply demand membership, it said. The council must approve. Vasquez turned to look at the crystalline being, and her smile never wavered. We are not demanding membership, she said. We are informing you that we are taking it, because we have learned something important over the past 87 years. She looked around the chamber at the assembled elders. These ancient beings who had ruled the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. We learned that the Concord does not protect its members, she said. We learned that polite requests are ignored and formal complaints are buried. We learned that the only power that matters is the power to take what you want and keep it. She straightened her shoulders and met the Crethorius gaze directly. So we are taking what we want, and we are keeping it, and if anyone has objections, they are welcome to express them. No one spoke. Vasquez nodded, as if the silence was exactly what she had expected. Additionally, she continued, humanity will be assuming oversight of all Concord military operations going forward. We will ensure that no member species ever suffers what New Helsinki suffered, because unlike the elders, we understand what it means to protect those who trust us. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, she said. We are willing to return to being polite. We are willing to smile and bow and follow protocols, because that is our nature when we are treated with respect. Her eyes swept across the chamber one final time. But remember what you have seen. Remember what we are capable of when we are pushed too far, and treat us accordingly. Years later, a young Valith scholar would ask the Silicate Minds why they had not joined the other elders in opposing humanity. The ancient machines considered the question for a long moment. Because we understood something the others did not, they replied. The humans were not hiding their strength out of fear. They were hiding it out of mercy. They knew what they were capable of, and they spent 87 years hoping no one would make them prove it. The scholar was confused. Mercy? It asked. They destroyed an entire species. Yes, the Silicate Minds agreed. One species, after extreme provocation. And they stopped there. They did not punish the Crethori for being the collective's patrons. They did not retaliate against the Valith for decades of insults. They drew a very specific line and destroyed only those who crossed it. The machines paused before delivering their final observation. That is not the behavior of a species that enjoys violence. That is the behavior of a species that hates violence, but has become extremely good at it. And the most dangerous creature in the galaxy is one who kills only when necessary, but does so without hesitation. The scholar left with much to consider. And across the galaxy, a new lesson was added to every species' diplomatic training when dealing with humans. Remember that the smile is not weakness. The smile is a warning.